Last year, at about this time, I returned home from the grocery store, and my young neighbors had arrived simultaneously. This is while I was still out in Livermore, of course. And the three of them hopped out of their minivan, each carrying an armful of gifts. Dolls and princess toys were in abundance. And one of the girls exclaimed, "Look at all of these presents that Santa is going to bring us." Now, being that it was only December 10th, I was a little confused. "How will Santa bring you those presents if you already have them?" I asked naively. "Oh," said one of the girls, "it's easy. He'll wrap them up on Christmas Eve, and then we will open them in the morning and be surprised." Now, I thought that this idea was pretty smart on my neighbor's part, because as a child, I was always one to agonize over what was in those boxes under the tree. I would pick them up and shake them, making several attempts to guess what was inside. It would drive my parents nuts. I imagine that my neighbor had gotten pretty tired of her children doing something similar, and so she let them have their presents early, or guess what they were, at least, to pick them out. I was chagrined by that decision. Waiting is a central theme for this time of year. And in our consumerist culture, it has come to be a time of waiting to give and receive gifts. And sometimes that experience can be truly special. As I have gotten older, I found that there is a unique satisfaction in watching someone open a gift that I know that she will love. Waiting to give and receive gifts can indeed be a meaningful experience. But giving and receiving gifts does not capture the fullness of what it means to wait, however. Religious traditions contain memories of a much fuller and often more perilous experience of waiting. For our ancient pagan ancestors, for instance, this time of year provoked intense anxiety. It was a real question of whether the sun would return. Or would the days just keep growing shorter until there was no longer any light? The winter solstice saw an all-night vigil around a fire, fearfully awaiting the sunrise, trying to hold on to that light so that it would reemerge with the next morning. Now, in the Christian liturgical calendar, this season is about waiting for the birth of Jesus. The weeks leading up to Christmas attempt to capture the full experience of waiting. Many churches assign text for each of those Sundays. Those texts, what's called a lectionary, are all over the place on these Sundays. There's no single part of the Bible that they are drawn from. Some of them are about the end of the world. The frenetic nature of this selection points, I think, to the anxiety that is implicit within so much human waiting. The season of Advent seems to advise participants Christmas may come at the end of this month, but it is not a certainty. We don't know at this particular moment. Instead, we have to abide in waiting. We have to abide with the experience of uncertainty. Now, The Second Coming, which is a poem by W.B. Yeats, captures this experience of not knowing. It goes like this. Turning and turning in the widening gyre, the falcon cannot hear the falconer. Things fall apart, the center cannot hold. Mere anarchy is loosed upon the world. The blood-dimmed tide is loosed, and everywhere the ceremony of innocence is drowned. The best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. Surely some revelation is at hand. Surely the second coming is at hand. The second coming, hardly are those words out when a vast image out of Spiritus Mundi troubles my sight. Somewhere in the sands of the desert, a shape with a lion body and the head of a man, a gaze blank and pitiless as the sun, is moving its slow thighs, while all about it reel shadows of the indignant desert birds. The darkness drops again. But now I know that 20 centuries of stony sleep were vexed to nightmare by a rocking cradle. And what rough beast, its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born. Much ink has been spilled about this poem, and yet its meaning is notoriously difficult to decipher. I would like to suggest my own reading of Yeats's The Second Coming and suggest that it is partially, at least partially, about the agony of waiting. The opening where the falcon cannot hear the falconer gives the reader a sense of being lost, of losing connection. But the bird keeps turning and the falconer keeps waiting and waiting. As if in a dream, we then hear about everything that could take place from within this anxious experience of waiting. A blood-dimmed tide loosed upon the world, the ceremony of innocence drowned. It is as if this vision is taking place in that agony of waiting. Not sure of what will come, the reader envisions the worst. It is at this point that we get some of the best lines in all of history about waiting. In this hour of waiting, Yeats says, the best lack all conviction, while the worst are full of passionate intensity. When people know not what is to come, they may be torn in this direction. They may be torn in one direction, which is the direction of passivity. They may find no solid ground to anchor their convictions. What are even worse are those who desperately grasp for some kind of action in the midst of that. In order to stave off the fear and anxiety of the unknown, they move towards a chaotic and passionate intensity. Now, when I was working as a chaplain, I was with families whose waiting has spanned all of those experiences. I remember sitting down with one couple that had just learned that their daughter, while riding a bicycle to work, was hit by a truck. If there was a bone in her body that could be broken, it was. She was in shock when she got to the hospital, and the staff induced a coma. There was no guarantee that she would wake. Things fall apart, Yeats says. The two parents had exactly opposite reactions to this event. The mother sat there wringing her hands. She could not decide what to do, and sometimes she would just be silent for long stretches of time. The father expressed his anxiety in anger. He attacked everyone, the doctors, the nurses, and me. When his passionate intensity turned towards God, I found that I was the convenient stand-in. A chaplain, he said, staring at me with utter intensity. What the hell do I need that for? Are you here to tell me that God is going to make this better? Damn God. He could have made this better by making sure my daughter wasn't hit. I told him that I would have been angry at God too, that being angry at God was okay. I then asked if there was anything that he needed from me, any way that I could be a support, even if it was just to listen. It was not the first or the last time that I was kicked out of a patient's room. And what could I do but understand this reaction that came straight out of the pain and the anxiety of having to wait? I think that somewhere between passionate intensity and utter passivity is another option. My reading earlier in the service that Carla read from Henry Nouwen points towards this. Nouwen writes, "Active waiting means to be present fully to the moment. It is the conviction that something is happening where you are and that you want to be present to that thing. A waiting person is someone who is present to the moment, who believes that this moment is the moment." This is not, as Nouwen would admit, to say that this waiting then becomes enjoyable. Far from it. But there is a spiritual art of being present to the moment that Nouwen captures in his writing, one that can be very real in our human experiences. Utter passivity and passionate intensity drive us away from the moment that is at hand, and sometimes we may need to escape the moment that is at hand because it is too terrible. But those things can be dangerous. They demand that what is happening at the present moment is not what is most important. Utter passivity paints a false door which says, check out, escape, let your mind go blank, think of anything but what is happening in this moment. And passionate intensity paints an opposing doorway saying, this moment is not important. What is important is that you do something to change it. It doesn't matter what that thing is. It can be anything, but just make sure that this experience changes now. Both of those things abandon the moment that is present for something else. Those things insist that this moment is not the moment. Now, one may ask, what good then does it do to wait? Why would it matter? What does it mean to have this presence of active waiting? Let me give you another example from when I was working at that same hospital. On my rounds, there was an elderly man who had been in the hospital for over a month. Each day I would walk in and ask his wife how she was doing and how he was doing. And each day she would tell me that she believed that her husband was going to come home in a few days. That happened and happened until one day it didn't. I walked in and the husband was hooked up to several machines. He had taken a turn for the worse. The wife told me quite bluntly that this was the day that she learned that her husband would not come home after all. When I left her room, I saw about 20 people sitting in the waiting area. Out of curiosity, I asked them if there was anything I could do to help or be a support. They informed me that they were members of that couple's church. One of them said, "We just came to wait with her. We just came to wait with her." They were doing what Nouwen calls active waiting. They knew with certainty that there was nothing more important than that particular moment, than that time of just sitting and waiting. That moment was the moment. The quiet dignity of their vigil has stuck with me for years. The fact that they waited, that they offered a radical presence in the midst of that couple's darkest moments, made a deep and lasting impression on me. It seemed like a generous act of humanity in an otherwise heart-rending situation, a way of holding on to and bearing witness to the possibility of hope and goodness, even in a time as fraught as that. That is the power of waiting, the experience that our religious traditions ask us around this time of year to notice and to witness. And that is wise, I think, because it is often in these times when we wait, when we don't know for sure what's going to happen in a certain situation, that are the most crucial. We need a spiritual vocabulary of waiting because waiting's interval can define who we are and how we will be with one another as human beings. It can be the moment when we hold on to goodness with one another in situations of uncertainty. It can be a powerful gift, the gift of saying, "This is the moment to which I choose to be present in the best and the deepest way that I possibly can with you." We cannot always be sure that Christmas will come. At the same time, we can always hold on to hope. Hope for that for ourselves and hope for that for one another. We can enter the moment that we are given with the hope that, against all odds and without any assuredness, something good and beautiful and true may emerge. Even in our darkest moments, we can be present to that. We can hold on to that because we never know when doing so will make all of the difference. I have seen it make all of the difference. I end with a brief prayer. Spirit of life, in our anxious times of waiting, may we be present to hope in this darkest time of year. Let Christmas come. Amen. I love you, and may yours be a day of gladness.